the thing that I'm looking at right now, it seems to be like an age old, at least right now. I don't know if it's age old, but it's definitely present right now, and it's present in those conversations we've been having on a Modmin team. Was the conversation around how much how much support is coddling, and how much how much of it is too hard, and what's the sweet spot, and how to find that sweet spot in the context of a large community. I contend that there's not really a good way to do this for a large number of people. I think it's possible at a large scale within a small group of individuals that can see each other. It's certainly possible in the context of one-on-one relationship, whether it's a friendship or business relationship or partnership, or even relationship with your child. Like, you have to find out. By the way, love and logic when he gets old enough is super cool, because it's all about self-responsibility, but with empathy. So, but there's a lot of other like techniques of how to approach this. So how do you do that with a large group of 9,000 currently, or 4 or 3 or even 1? That's a heck of a lot of people who don't know each other, who don't see each other, who will necessarily not see eye to eye, who haven't had to go through like a rite of passage of some kind, and agreed to a set of principles, and we're kind of like onboarded onto the group via those sets of those principles or agreements. So at this point in the game, and I think that applies for society at large, I see the two camps. I see the camp of, if the only way you can actually learn and grow is by facing some level of hardship or some level of difficulty. I'm not going to necessarily call it hardship. And on the other hand, there's the other camp who says, let's make this as easy as possible for those who have the hardest time. Mm-hmm. And I see the value of both. And it almost, for me, it's almost like it depends. And it really depends on the person. It depends on their situation. It depends on possibly what their nervous system is made of, how they've been reacting to different things. And I also see the from a perspective of administering or leading or stewarding a community, is putting attention on those people who need it the most, as this potential of allocating all resources in that direction, and then kind of sucking the life dry of people who really are trying to address the needs of a large swath of people. And I think this is true of politicians too, and it's true of any leader in general. So I'll hand it off to you. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Sure. A few things kind of bubble as you were speaking, and that is, there's a lot of evidence that says that human beings are really designed to be able to hold and navigate, between 100 and 150 relationships, sort of that kind of tribal scope of human community, and that there seems to be some kind of drop off or fall off of integration, of cohesion, of having the capacity and the tools to navigate larger groups. Now, I think there's an argument for that we're in the process of developing those capacities, but we're not there yet, and that's why this experiment of modern human culture is messy, because we don't have the tools and the awareness yet for the most part. I think they're possible. I think that they can be developed, but as a culture, as a society, we're not there yet. The other pieces that I think of, I love looking to nature and seeing like nature works so well, and it does so within massive, diverse communities. And how and why is that so? And so a couple of the things that come up is that somehow nature knows the relationship between competition and collaboration or cooperation, and nature and its constituents also recognize that part of their role is to die. So yes, as much as they fight for their survival and the forwarding of their genetic information, there's also what I identify as a known understanding that part of their role is also to come to the end of their time in form and give that form back into the system. and that's something human
Yes.
beings are not good at.
Totally suck at it.
Yeah, and it's such a powerful wisdom, and I think for us, because you just mentioned it at the beginning of the conversation, when we do deep emotional work, even though our physical life might not be ending, our nervous system doesn't know that.
Yeah.
The way it shows up in our experience, our felt sense of what's going on, is that I'm going to die and I need to survive. So I'm thinking about that kind of natural context. Well, what is it that makes it work? And I think it's the fact that the parts of ecosystems know that they're a part of a whole, and that's intrinsically known by them, and human beings are able to somehow develop a way of being in the world that doesn't have that intrinsic sense. So now
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so then I kind of necessarily identify threats to my sense of self and my sense of safety and security, and then I employ all of the ways in which that I've learned to protect myself to defend against that threat. Now, there are real threats, but especially in modern human culture, most of those threats are social, or threats to comfort, or threats to a narrow sense of self, and not necessarily a threat to existential survival. So, being able to get that is important, and you can't get that for someone. They need to be willing to let that less self-centered way of being in the world in, and all of its implications. So, that's sort of a philosophical piece. What I also think about is, like, in the human system, we have billions and billions and billions of cells. I was just watching a show today. They said about 60 billion cells a day actually die, and most of them are actually killing themselves. So the cell it's not like a natural cell death that then gets processed and then the body kind of reconstitutes that material. The cells are actually committing suicide in a way, because the body knows that those cells need to get, the material of those cells needs to get reworked into the system, and it's needed for this other thing that's going on in the body. And so but also there's tissues, right? There's muscle tissue, and there's bone tissue, and there's kidney tissue, and there's heart tissue, and there's brain tissue, and they have different roles, and there's sort of different rules that govern them. And so when I'm thinking about how do we provide support and governance of some kind to a loose community of 9,000 people, is there any way to provide more kind of local or regional support to smaller groups within the larger group? And that's easier to do in a community, because then you have geographic areas, you have social and kind of intellectual engagement, you have professional life, you have personal things that are going on in the community, and that can all be kind of, okay, well, recreation is going to be headed by so and so, and the social and emotional learning is going to be headed by so and so. In a group like a Facebook group, you don't have those kinds of abilities to parse out the community and create those more local or regional. Yeah, exactly. So, like, in a way, that's what's needed. And in its absence, what I think is necessary is, on a initial level, as the modmins, how secure are we? And how committed are we to staying with secure ways of being and ways of communicating that are modeling that to the group? That's not nothing. That goes a long way, especially when things get kind of electric or emotional. Can we remain grounded and clear while that's going on in any direction, whether that's someone who's telling you that they feel blamed and victim shamed by you, and that they want more love and nurturing and support, or whether someone's saying, like, grow up, like, stand up and be a responsible human being and stop being such a softie. Like, for us to just stay clear and clean in that matters. I think the onboarding process of new people into the community matters. And I think creating a higher bar for that entry, I think, will go a long way. And then I think the material that's shared, and the spirit of that material, to not just communicate things that we think are of value to the broader community, but also to instill and define what are we really doing here, which is really what a lot of what's been talked about, so that people can begin in an empowered way self-selecting themselves in or out of the community.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's most of the posts that I've been writing on the group have not been specifically about attachment theory. Most of them have been about what is this group about? What is the vision of the group? What do we feel as modmins can actually work? Or what do I feel as the sort of the first modmin, sort of kind of having onboarded everybody else who's a modmin now, with no pressure. I've sort of plucked people from different attachment styles because I value their voice and I feel like what they've been bringing to the table is useful, and I feel a very strong ownership of the vision of the group, which is a kind of self-arranging community that is I wouldn't say self-policing, but self-arranging, that's rising up in awareness and in security for sure, in maturity and in wisdom, sort of like what's the best way to engage with each other, and trying to kind of inject into the conversation, or at least as separate posts, like what does that look like in real life, instead of just saying, well, let's just get along, or some version of that, or let's post things that are supportive of each other. That's too general. So to get more into the specifics of that, I'm always hoping it's going to help, but every once in a while, somebody says, oh, self-responsibility means hyper-individualism. Like, that's really interesting. Like, why would somebody go directly to that instead of the more, what I find is the more healthy version of what can I be responsible for? And if I can't, can I get support so I can become over time more responsible for things that I could not before, and without going further than I'm able, and without leaning so hard on somebody else that at some point they say, well, I can't do it anymore, tough, or you're on your own now. So creating not just self-arranging but self-balancing sort of subsystems within the larger system.
Yeah, and you're talking about self-regulation as from a system level.
Yeah, exactly. It's something else that I was that came for me as you were speaking about our evolution on this planet, in some ways, and I was like, there's this massive adaptiveness that came with human beings. Like, we're so adaptive that often I'll say, it's very likely we'll adapt ourselves out of this ecosystem. Like, we're basically or out of existence, out of this ecosystem, or out of existence. Like, we'll essentially manage to extinguish ourselves because we're so adaptive, but adaptive in a way that we don't know yet if it's going to pan out. But for me, what occurred to me as you were speaking is kind of a new thought, which is, what if this level of adaptiveness is a sort of response to the possibility, the eventual possibility, that there will be too many people, or too many animals, or too many, like too many creatures for the resources that are available. Like, how do you solve that on a planet with a population that keeps on growing, in a way that could go kind of like a runaway population growth? Like, what do we do about that? Or what does nature do about that? And I was like, wow, maybe this is the adaptiveness that we have, is sort of a preparation for that happening. And sure enough, peak population is happening in 20, 30, 40 years. And simultaneously, we're seeing global warming happening around, or peak global warming, or whatever it is, kind of happening around the same time. But at the same time, we're developing technologies that might allow us to actually circumvent a whole lot of that. So it's interesting to see all of this kind of coming together to a head, and all of this, I would say, created by this extra layer of brain that we've been given, that allows us to create things that have never existed before, and imagine them into being, at a pace and at a level of sophistication that the animal kingdom has never seen before.
Yeah, I mean, our technology far has outpaced our kind of emotional and spiritual development, at least in this phase of the operation, and the implications are significant. Too. Sure, and I think the implications are essentially that the tools and the technologies are becoming more and more powerful, and we're not keeping pace with the level of maturity needed to wield them well, and then the risks are obvious. But I feel like it's a bit of a, related but not central to the discussion of the Facebook group.
Yes, true. It's true. I kind of went off a little bit because you were speaking of that, and there's something to be said about. I mean, if we bring it back to the Facebook group, at some level, I think we're hitting. I wouldn't call them hard limits because they feel very fuzzy, but we're hitting limitations in people's ability to engage at a systems level. Like it's hard enough. If we look at Keegan's levels of neurological development, most people are stuck at level. A bunch of people are stuck at level 2, which is very, very self-referential, and then level 3. Some people are at level 4 and level 5, and level 3 is sort of where the bulk of people are. They can think relationally and symmetrically with others, but asymmetrically it becomes difficult. It's hard to see the sense of it or the fairness of it, it's hard to engage by saying, oh, I engage with you a certain way, you engage with me a different way, and it's fair for both of us, or it feels right for both of us, even though it looks very different. And it's very difficult I feel, for the brain to create the kind of pattern matching that gives a sense of, are we going in the right direction in this relationship or not? Mm-hmm. And I feel like people in a group where people are mostly insecure, or at least exploring that, it's very difficult to move at that higher level. Mm-hmm. And so,
I'm just thinking about larger groups, because of course there are larger groups that are operating within something that you could say is similar to what the attachment community is doing. And I think you're inherently going to face similar challenges when groups like this operate, especially within a technology like a Facebook group. And I think the part of the challenge of providing leadership to such a community is that question of, to what degree and in what way do we intervene? Yes. And what amount of this community is going to be, are we going to trust to self-organize? Mm-hmm. And we can, of course, come in with too much control and structure and be too rigid, and we can be too, kind of laissez-faire and lackadaisical and chaotic.
Loosey-goosey.
And neither of those two things is it. And it's a moving target. Like each day, each interaction, each post is its own animal. But I think, a question that comes for me is, what is and how clear is the Modmin team about the underlying principles of the group? So like, what are the core principles and what are the core values in terms of, and I like to get, when I think of core principles, that's like, what is this for, and what upholds it? Like, what are the pillars that allow this to really be what it's designed to be? Mm-hmm. And then the core values to me are most helpful when they're about how we actually function. So how do we move in relationship to what arises in this community, especially when it's challenging? And I think the more clear that's laid out and is informed by what supports human community, mm-hmm. and the more consistently we can be and represent and move by that in relation to everyone that's in the group, mm-hmm. the more we can leave it to self-organize, in spite of the fact that it will be messy at times and people will misbehave. But then again, we have principles and we have guidelines, and we go, okay, you've just self-selected yourself out of the group. Thanks for coming. You know what I mean? Like then, and then it's not a drama and no one's wrong. It's just, there's clarity about the principles and the ways of acting to a degree where that becomes the backbone of leading and inviting the evolution of the culture within the group.
Yeah, I see this as a balance between striking a balance around how much structure is just enough structure for the group to self-organize. Like, if self-organization is a form of structure, but it has to evolve within a structure, which I'm imagining you mean by guiding principles and in what is the vision for the group, how does this group work? I would say I would say that's the structure we're trying to express as the Modmin team. Like we are, obviously, I created this group and I had a vision for it, and in fact, it's in the pin post at the top. So take a look and let me know how you would improve on it.
Mm.
But it was stated more is stated about around how's this group work, what is this group about, which mainly is about agency, self-responsibility, but from a perspective of you can't do this by yourself. Like there's a journey to it. Being secure doesn't mean doing it alone. That would be the avoidant aspect, and doing it always with others would be the anxious version. And so what's the center? What's the sort of like, oh, I could do it with others, or I could do it alone, and I can gather the resources that I need to do it in any possible situation, and to be flexible and have a lot of bandwidth in doing so. So that's sort of the general idea, and I've been growing this pin post, including the agreements, to express that. And I think as the Modmins have been recruited over the last year or two, they sort of come in and like, okay, well, how do I manage this group? And obviously the conversation that come out of it is me saying, okay, well, this is what I think based on the guiding principles of the group. But every person coming in from an anxious perspective or an avoidant perspective or a secure or disorganized perspective will have a different sort of view on those principles, which, as clear as they may sound at first, the interpretation of it will look differently. And so I've been actually really grateful for the different perspectives, because it means that everybody at some level, if there's Modmins that have the different attachment styles, at some level everybody on the group gets heard. Mm-hmm. because they're able to kind of sense what this particular subgroup needs. So it's like it's like having representatives of each of the subgroups of each of the attachment styles as a way of being able to speak for them, but also speak to them as well.
Yeah, like I mean, I think of it like there's the metaphor of the canary in the coal mine. Do you know that metaphor?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I think of our nervous systems as these very complex interpreters of inner and outer reality, and they bring information based on their configuration.
That's right.
In other words, I have certain areas that are depressed in my sensitivity to. So there's a kind of numbness in me for all sorts of reasons in certain areas of life, in certain aspects of my inner and outer experience, and I'll miss things. And that's where the value, and this is why I think human community is of value, and it's why, to me, the value of saying, hey, there's this kind of attachment style and that kind of attachment style, to me, that's not an ultimate truth or the end of the story. It's a way to describe a particular nervous system configuration and a constellation of behaviors that are designed for a certain purpose. And if we can hold them that way, then we can take advantage of what they're good at without being sort of victim of what they're not good at. But then everyone needs to be responsible, right? So that people who are super sensitive to certain things need to get that they're going to be able to register things that a lot of other people can't, that need to get listened to. And they're also going to think that something needs addressing that actually may not need addressing. And on the flip side, the same is true, right? The people there are going to be good at saying, no, don't worry, that's not important. And they'll be right some of the time. And some of the time they'll say that and they'll be full of it because they're just numb or avoidant of it. And so like what's coming to me is really like, I think good things are happening in the group in spite of the fact that these challenges are arising, partly a function of the growing size and nature of the community. And worth noting that this is happening within the technology of a social media platform that is designed to drive engagement. And so the ways in which people will receive the content on the group is actually going to facilitate polarization.
Yeah, well,
the whole way that system is built is to encourage engagement, and emotional polarization is the most powerful way to do that. So it's just good to know that that's the technology that's housing this community, at least currently. And then it's like, how do we become more articulate and more nuanced and more consistent in expressing what I think this conversation is really about? And I really believe video is part of the story there, because text, it misses so much. And
Yeah,
I think
for sure.
for us as a team of modmins, if we're open to it, to get better at creating video material to share on the group that allows people to sit and be with a fuller picture of the message that's there, or a fuller picture of what wants to be articulated from the administration of the group. It's not the only thing, but I think it's a part of the puzzle, and it's something that I'm, of course, fully engaged in my work, and interested in bringing what I have to bring to support that in bringing more value to the group and to everyone that's a part of it.
It's interesting. I both agree. Yeah, I agree that video kind of communicate at some level communicates more. There's, you know, you essentially get to feel somebody a lot more than through text. So much is lost with text. At the same time, video requires enough attention that you can only input so much of it into your psyche at any one time. And so there has to be enough of a commitment of watching the thing in order for it to be absorbed properly. You know, comparatively, text, you can skim text, you can kind of go back to it, you can kind of read it, you can, you know, there's different ways to absorb the text because people have been reading for, you know, thousands of years at this point. And so I think there's even that takes time, but you can put a bunch of bullet points across that. If you try to do this in video, you just look at the video, all you see is an image, an unmoving image, and you're not getting anything. But just looking at 6 bullet points of text, you can actually absorb it. So it's interesting because the video itself, until you play it, it's a little bit like a book that's sitting on my desk. Until I actually open it and read it, it might as well just be a pile of paper. So in video is a little bit like that. There's just so much content out there, but people have to have the bandwidth to actually sit, absorb it, or drive somewhere while they're listening, or some version of having enough attention for the content while they're doing something else, or do nothing else, which is becoming harder and harder over time. So there's this sort of this sort of curve of attention that's going down while the amount of content is going up. It is never going to go down. It's always going to go up faster and harder. And now we're back to the nervous system. We can only absorb so much. Like our attention span is only so much, and some of that attention span has to be delegated to not being engaged in order to actually learn what it's like to not be engaged all the time. Otherwise, it's like you're on caffeine day in and day out.
Yeah. I mean, I nothing in me is at odds with what you've just said, except to say that of course that's true. And to me, that's not an argument against using video. It's just to recognize the pros and cons of the different ways in which we can share and engage on the platform.
For sure. I mean, it would be better to have more options. At the very least, it gives people, like I mean, for me, it would be way more interesting that if each of the guides also included a video, so that people can either watch it or read it, and at some level to be able to just kind of listen to all of the guides one by one as a playlist would be amazing. Yeah, it's interesting to see and try to discern what this group needs in order to grow properly. And even the idea of growing properly, you know, I'm okay with some level of messiness. I'm okay with some level of conflict, but some people are not. And so for me to say, you know, that post was messy, fine, now we're learning. But for them, it's like they're going to need to take 3 days to regulate after just reading it. And so that brings the question is, you know, can this group address everybody's need? Which, you know, individually, I don't think it's possible. And how much support can we offer as a modmin team? I think individually, I think people can say, well, I'm open to coaching people, I'm open to making this offer and that offer. And other people will say, no, I don't have the bandwidth. I'm already dealing with a brother who's got mental illness, or a girlfriend, or 3 children. And so even what each of the modmin is bringing to the table is you know, essentially as an unpaid as an unpaid job, you know, they're bringing just their blood, sweat, and tears for the love of it.
Mhm.
At least at this point in the game.
Yeah, I'm a yes to all that.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that that you were yes to being brought into the conversation, because I feel like you're bringing a very center, you know, like a very not center is not the right word, but a very neutral, balanced view,
Mm.
and an intelligence to the conversation that is, at least from where I'm sitting, very difficult to counter, even from a place of, I don't, you know, of disagreement.
Yeah, to me, I think one of my strengths and what I reach for in how I operate is first inclusion. Like I
Yeah,
want to be in relationship with everything that's really at play,
yeah,
and then use as much discernment as I can to see where the levels of value are with all of that, and then
yeah.
make choices about first what's most important, and then subsequent levels of value from there. And
Yeah.
that's a simple principle, but the ability to operate within it and stay true to that principle is
Mhm.
not a simple thing.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting because on the call, on the modmin, it wasn't a modmin call. It was something Dylan was going to do, but you know, it evolved the way it evolved, and it was interesting because you were mentioning your sensitivity to sort of pushback, and it was interesting. It was interesting because I was like, wow, I've never actually noticed that side of you.
Mm.
Like, I believe it because I've been there. I've had people push back against me either on my wall or in the attachment community group, like really hard. And at first I'm like, I'm just handling the conversation. I'm going through the points. Sometimes I don't have the full bandwidth to address every single point, so I address what seems to be the most salient. And then eventually there's like 5 or 6 people who are rapid firing in my direction, and my nervous system sometimes gets dysregulated. And it was interesting to witness you share about that, because I've never actually seen you in that space. And it's possible people have not seen me in that space. They could just imagine, and they think I'm just solid as a, you know, piece of wood.
Mm.
So I don't know. I'm curious. I'm curious what that looks like when you get dysregulated.
Yeah, I mean, I think my dysregulation is in some ways dependent on the circumstances at play and who's
For sure.
involved in all of that. Um, uh, I would say if I was going to relate to an insecure attachment style, avoidant is definitely is sort of my stronger leaning.
Hmm.
I think at an early age, I decided I was just going to do it on my own.
Hmm.
That was my solution to
Yeah.
a space that felt like, um, yeah, that it was challenging for others for me to be in the world.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that was my solution for that.
Hmm.
And it's, you know, I built up ways to navigate, and often that was a more distant, less emotionally available way of being in the world.
Hmm.
I still was warm and compassionate and wanted to connect, but often there in the background running was, how do I do this where I'm not fully vulnerable?
Mm. Yeah.
And so
Hmm.
when I engage or put out something that's true or real for me, and there's a negative response, it's like, well, I mean, it's like I'm 6 years old again.
Right. Yeah.
And
Hmm.
then those parts of me and my life that felt like, it's better if I just back away and create no waves,
Hmm.
and just sort of become a self-contained piece in the world. That's what it feels like, is like, oh, I want to kind of go away and hide and
Hmm.
leave everybody to just be whatever they are.
Right.
And
Hmm.
so life has been a kind of navigating of that tendency, and my love of being connected, and my love of vulnerability, and yeah, like my sense of having some part to play in bringing those disparate pieces together.
Mm. Beautiful. Yeah, I was reflecting on my own version of that, and what I realized is that like a few years ago on Facebook, specifically Facebook, because I haven't really been on any of the others, was that like there was a point where my presence on Facebook became a lot darker and fiercer. And I think partially this came at the outset of having felt, having put things out there that were very vulnerable and having been attacked as a result, or feeling attacked. Maybe I wasn't attacked, but that's the way it felt. And so obviously there's a bias there, that's potentially leaning in that direction, and it's sort of kind of developing this initially this sort of way of posting that was like very precise and very clear, very, as intelligent as I could muster it. And then over time realizing that the response to that wasn't really that great, that there wasn't that much response to it, or there wasn't any visible and enough visible response that led me to believe that the intelligence was received as such. Mm-hmm. And eventually I slowly started like not caring, like some version of not giving a fuck about what people thought. Like initially I would respond to every comment and sort of like try to engage and help and use that to help me understand what maybe I wasn't getting. And then I started sort of facing a lot of what I call ideology or moralism that was essentially not paying attention to what I was saying. It was just saying, oh, you're like this because I interpret you to be like that, and that's such is the truth. And I started realizing I just have this vision of this sort of post-apocalyptic Earth where you've got Mad Max, who's just basically a badass because if he's not, he's gonna die within the next 5 minutes. and that fierceness kind of started to that dark fierceness started to arise. While simultaneously in my life, people would say, "Wow, you're so different online than how you are in real life." And I'm like, yeah, because in real life, I don't feel like people are like 5 people. I don't feel like 5 people are just about to jump me. Or 10 or 15 for some reason, for some ideological reason or moral reason. And so it's essentially like I built a persona that's dark enough and fierce enough and don't fuck with me enough that I felt like I was safe enough to be able to go on my exploration with people who wanted to meet me well enough to have these explorations of very difficult conversations about like what's the nature of where we're going and or what we're becoming, certainly at a social level.
Yeah, and it's interesting for me because I know you in the way that I know you, and I think our little bit of time being in person and some of our personal conversations gives me a real sense of the inside of you, and noticing the difference between that and what gets posted. But because I know you, I know what you're saying. I know where you're coming from, and I can easily see how, whether it's because they don't have that sense of you or that relationship with you, or because their ideology makes it impossible for them to look at more than their particular take on what you say, that it impacts the people's picture of you in terms of who they think you are. It's an interesting conversation because I used to write more. I used to write long posts about
I love those
deep, broad philosophical things, and there was response to them, and then at some point I felt like I spent kind of a year not posting much at all, and then since then I've been trying to figure out what I want to do. Like I actually don't know what I want to do in terms of posting online, and I'm in a kind of just a really curious, earnest desire to figure that out, at least in the way that makes it practical for me to engage online in the short term. But yeah, I enjoy how you approach it, and your dance of figuring out what's too sharp or too cold, or what's not
blunt, too blunt,
yeah,
too
or
shitty.
what's not sensitive enough, or what's too sensitive, or like I love and trust that you're gonna make your way in a way that has heart and compassion in it. And what I also think is good, I'll just reflect this because I think these are the kinds of reflections that are worth kind of sending and receiving, which is, I think in many ways you show people who want to walk the road you're walking how it might look and sound, including how you engage criticism and attack. And that's where I recognize part of leadership is to be all stretched to be our very best when it hurts the most, while we're being observed by others.
Right.
Of course, it's not for that, but that's just a natural consequence of what I think leadership really is that they get to see what it looks like to be more than just your vulnerabilities and reactions to life, while things feel really vulnerable and where you might feel mistreated.
Right. Yeah. There's a few thoughts that were coming, but they kind of escaped me. In a way, well, first of all, I've been missing your post because you were the most incisive responder to any of my comments on somebody else's wall I've ever seen. Like, I could very often I just dropped out because I didn't have anything better to say, and that says a lot. It's very rare that I encounter somebody who I can respond, and we go back and forth, and I'm like, wow, okay, that's it. I don't have any more moves, which is not a bad thing. It's not like I'm stuck. Well, I mean, in a way, you could say that I'm stuck, but in another way, there's an end point where this is the edge of what I'm trying to figure out, and I get to be there with somebody else. And if at some other time, like it'll continue to sort of brew in my head or brew in somewhere inside of me until a later date where, okay, something unlocks. But I had to have that. It's, there's an element of sparring that when it's done, like I don't know, I'm thinking of like Chinese martial arts movie where there's deep honor in the engagement. And even if one person loses or it's not as exactly obvious who's winning, it's not about that. It's about the practice of measuring, one's intelligence against another that leads to like new thoughts. And there's a creative process that comes along with that, and it can look like battling, and people do it in gaming all the time. It also reminds me of this. Have you seen this movie Whiplash?
Yeah, I think so. Remind me of it.
It's basically this drummer, this young, super talented drummer who ends up finding a mentor, a teacher who's a director, but also a jazz director, and a jazz director, and the director ends up becoming his teacher and his mentor, and starts pushing him hard, like so hard that at some point the guy has a depression and basically ends up quitting school, and then later on, okay, spoiler alert. I'll say that because if you skip a couple of minutes forward, if you haven't seen the movie, somewhat towards the end, like 15 minutes before the end, he the guy, the drummer, ends up finding his teacher in a jazz club, just playing beautiful jazz, and ends up having coffee with him after the whole debacle and water under the bridge. And he says, so what's why were you so hard with me, or some version of that, if I remember correctly. And the teacher said, if you were going to be the next greatest, I had to push you hard enough to get you there. The world is owed that much, or some version of, like, there was like a larger goal that justified what looked on the outside as abusive behavior, but it was this sort of like, it's the sort of like the teacher against the student. The teacher wants to wrestle the greatest greatness possible from the student. And the student is like, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. And the teacher's like, no, I know you can. I can see that in you. And so, and I'm reminded of that movie because not because of the teacher-student relationship, but the conflict that can arise between two people can be incredibly creative. It's dark, it's messy, it can be harmful, but at the outset of it, like some deeper realizations can come out of it. And
the one thing I just wanted to say in that, what you're saying, because it resonates in me so clearly, which is there's something about the pressure, and you're talking about kind of getting to the end of your line, whatever that is, where you're like, I don't know where I've used my moves and I don't know where else to go here. It reminds,
to learn.
But it reminds me of like the sparring scene between Morpheus and Neo in the Matrix, when Morpheus is trying to get Neo to realize what he is, and that when someone especially masterfully can press us to our current understood edge, to proceed past that, we need to find a new dimension within ourselves. Like literally a new dimension has to open up for us to then have freedom of movement at the edge of that threshold. And that's what you're talking about, whether it's music or sport or martial arts or intellect. It's like those are all just different domains in which we can do the same thing, which is to find more of who and what we are that allows us to hold more and proceed more into the world.
You know, as you were speaking, I just had this piece that just came to me. Like what you're saying is that it's the pushing and the adversity that unlocks the kind of the new capacities, and the flip side of that is the difficulty and the adversity will also kill and maim and destroy a portion of the people who attempt to push past adversity. And so it's very hard to justify that morally. It's just like the just the fact that adversity exists in the first place, because it's going to destroy some people, and it has, and it continues to. I mean, this civilization lives at the tail end of countless millions of people who have died before us. Some of them happy, but a hell of a lot of them in difficult circumstances, and we all benefit from that. And so it's a dark, gritty perspective. And I think, and what I see a lot of in society nowadays is this sort of this desire to eliminate all harm. And the unfortunate outcome of it is that most people will not move towards something that feels too dangerous unless they have some level of anti-fragility, some level of a sense that they can, that having moved through difficult challenges and circumstances, that they can do it again. Like I was just speaking with my girlfriend earlier, and in some ways she can handle adversity more than me. Like if something bad happens, she's like, been there, I'm still here. At some other level, her nervous system is fucked for the same reason. So she's both in some ways less fragile and in some ways more fragile. And you know, I don't think there's a necessarily an optimal version of that. You know,
well, I'll poke at that just a little bit in terms of you know, I think what you're talking about is a philosophy or a way of holding our life that can relate to past experiences where we did the hard thing and it went well, and kind of using evidence from the past to move forward. And there's massive value in that. And it's why we, you know, with people that struggle or people who are really, you know, in a tough place, we want to find small ways for them to succeed so they can get out of their commitment to saying that it's all garbage. But I also think there's a place within which we can live life that doesn't need the evidence first. That's a much more powerful place to live from. And what allows us to connect to that place is we need something essentially worth dying for, that we can choose to live for.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then we don't need past evidence that it's going to go okay, because we know it's worth it regardless of the outcome. And when I look at human beings that have done truly exceptional things, that's what's operating. They're not doing it because they know they're anti-fragile and it went well in the past when they did the hard thing, and so they're going to do it again now. They're committed to doing the thing that they know to do, knowing that it may very likely not go well, but
Or
they're
kill them.
clear enough. They're clear enough that it's worth doing anyway. So to me, it's like they're both worth noticing, but one is circumstantial and requires kind of evidence, and the other doesn't require that evidence.
It's interesting. I mean, I agree with you. I think it's living for something. And I mean, in a way, that the fact that we're human, we have that extra layer of brain and the capacity for abstraction allows us to do that. We can imagine something better that doesn't exist, or that we've never seen, and believe, or potentially, and believe in it enough that it actually carries us forward despite the circumstances, like as a victory over the past, as they would say in Landmark.
And what if it's not an abstraction, essentially?
Right.
What if that capacity of abstraction you're talking about is actually really the attunement of something that's true and real inside, that you can then manifest? So then it's not actually a fabrication of something that has never existed. It's the attunement of an intrinsic value and motive that's embedded in us as human beings, that we can then manifest, even if it's never manifest in our particular life before. To me, that resonates more, and it's more empowering, actually.
I would call that moving, moving as soul.
I could go with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's perhaps a more spiritual view on it, but there's like this thing that exists that we can't necessarily touch or see, but we can feel it, and we can move with it. And it I mean, sometimes there's a way that you speak that kind of feels like it's touching for something more, if it's not experiential, if it's not something that you have to abstract into being, like you creating out of nothing, it's something that's already there, that's always been there, that will always be there. That's what I would call soul. And there's some,
And I like to kind of bring, because a lot of people could listen to this and go, well, I don't even know what the heck these guys are talking about. but because I think we get taught that if I can't intellectually kind of get it and make sense of it, then it's merely abstraction. But I think I have a new son, and you know what I'm talking about. They are hungry to engage life, including the challenging corners. Like, it's not easy being a baby. It's not comfortable being a baby. It's not easy to learn how to control your head and sit upright and learn to stand and walk for the first time. To suggest it's easy, you don't know how the nervous system grows and develops.
Right, it's still coming online for a while.
Something inside of that baby knows that that's what it's here for. It's not an abstraction, and it's not intellectual. It's a known sense of what to be and do in relation to the life that's there. And we are the same, except we have this overlay of identity and our intellectual sense of things. And I think that's mostly where we get lost. As it develops.
I mean, right now he doesn't have a sense of identity. He probably doesn't even have a sense of time. A lot of these things haven't come online yet. How many months has it been?
He's just about 5 months old.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's still coming online. Needs to learn everything, including how to fall asleep and how to breastfeed. But for me, when you're speaking, I've never looked at it from like a developmental standpoint. It's almost like the little bit of instinct that we have left, combined with a massive amount of adaptiveness, together, versus like mammals who are, mostly instinct with a little bit of adaptiveness, right? So we have that extra layer of brain, which kind of gives us the capacity to adapt to anything, possibly in negative ways. And so the combination of that little bit of instinct plus the adaptiveness kind of gives us maybe that's what we can call soul, or that thing that you're speaking of that kind of moves us forward into learning, into figuring it out, and eventually have identity.
Yeah, and I don't even need to, like, I enjoy getting into precision and categorizing and labeling and seeing into, like, conceptually how that might actually go. But first, I don't need any of that. No. I can just see it and know it in my son. And I can see and know the resonance of how that also exists in me, and how and where I can empower it and how and where I don't. And these pieces require none of that complexity or precision. They're more about relaxing into a perceptual awareness of the way things are actually unfolding right now, and what's at play in that unfolding. So I mean, that's you could say it's metaphysical, but it's also incredibly practical in terms of it's just present. It's here now.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe whether you give it a label or not, the label is just to have a handle to talk about it. What is the Vervaeke call it, a psycho tool, or there's metaphors are psycho tools. The labeling is a psycho tool. Like it allows us to do things by having this conversation instead of having to describe it every time. Obviously, it's also very subjective, but we make it more interoperable when we're able to label. So, but I'm not attached to the labels. It was more like, oh, maybe that's this kind of like making these connections between those different labels is also a way that we make sense of the world. Why? Yeah.
And
if we don't need, go ahead.
to have like frameworks and vocabulary that enable us to express something abstract and bring it more into a concrete understanding for others, like for ourselves. But to me, really understanding, this is a mistake I think a lot of people make, is they want understanding so that they can do the thing that actually inside they already know to do. That's not what understanding is for, because otherwise then, like, this is the person who has 3 PhDs, but they're still just like lost in insecurity. They're trying to get enough information to then engage life fully. That'll never happen. But we can use our understanding to help articulate to others and invite others into where that understanding really comes from, which is something more than just understanding. Like, I can understand falsehood. Okay, well, what's the use there? But understanding something that's real and being able to articulate that actually carries massive amounts of value for us. Yeah,
I mean, I see. For me, the benefit of understanding is as a source of validating what we already feel. Like there's a way that and I see this as as what clarity is about. Sort of things align, the puzzle is complete, and you go, okay. And it's almost like, it's at some level, and I don't know if you've heard about the theory of positive disintegration. Can't remember the name of the guy who's invented it, but there's this sense of like, sometimes like everything comes together and it all makes sense. It all sort of like the puzzle is made, and you see and you see this thing that you couldn't see before, and it takes intelligence to do that. There's and there's different ways to go about it. It could be somatic, or it could be emotional. Like the pieces can come together, not just in a conceptual way. And very often what happens after that is like the board is wiped. And from a wiped board, there's this sense of disorientation that can happen, or this sense of, okay, what now? Now that I know this, like, and now it's almost like the piece of the operating system, the upgrade got installed. Okay, now what do I do with that? And there's always the next step. It's not just about the understanding. It's about, for me, it's like that's what wisdom is about. It's like you start to use the realization for sharing it, obviously, but also to upgrade your own life. But because you're a different person, you're not moving the same way, and it requires a new sort of an evolved practice to fully include all these realizations together. So that, yeah. And that's why I love these conversations with you, because there's a fair number of pieces that kind of come closer together, that can happen with my son, that can happen with me walking around, and it's for me that there's a beauty and there's a delight in the diversity of all the ways that these pieces come together.
Yeah, I think we're naturally hungry for that integration. It's you know, a flow state is an experience that directly links you on the level of experience to what integration is. And that's why it's such a blissful, you know, transcendent experience. And as long as we're not attached to that experience, it's a good reminder to us of what we're here for.